I was sitting in the living room of someone else's apartment, a few steps away from coming face to face with my wife, when she came in with her ex. And now, it seems, her current lover. They had plans for the night. I was there to break that expectation and maybe regain some semblance of self-respect. I'm Tal Rivers, the guy who inadvertently disrupted what seemed like a solid 20-year marriage by offering his wife what he believed was a thoughtful gift for their 2-decade anniversary. I funded her pursuit of a master's degree in philosophy. Yeah, I get it. A master's in philosophy, really? Really. We had discussed it ever since our only child, Lydia, left for college 3 years earlier to study veterinary science. I was eagerly anticipating the freedom of being empty nesters for the first time in 18 years, but my wife evidently had different priorities. While I was envisioning a life of travel and more spontaneous intimacy, she was concerned about aging. Her solution was to take a year-long break from her job and return to academia for an advanced degree. Honestly, I wasn't enthusiastic about the idea for a while as we discussed it back and forth, but she was persistent, and being a loving husband, I eventually agreed. I thought it would make a great 20th anniversary gift, and I was right. When I told her, she cried and hugged me tightly. That night, she nearly suffocated me with affection in bed. Initially, she was ecstatic for the first few weeks, eagerly sharing every detail of her days at our local community college. I heard about her professors, classmates, courses, and even what she had for lunch. However, over time, those daily updates during dinner became less frequent. And around 2 months later, I had to practically pry information out of her like an interrogator with a suspect. Our overall communication became sparsy, a stark contrast to how it had been throughout our marriage. Having some experience under my belt, I sensed something was wrong. I spent days grappling with the situation, trying to decide what steps to take. Despite knowing what needed to be done, it took me a while to accept the reality that I had to enlist the help of a private investigator to look into my wife's activities. As the CFO of a sizable company, I had connections to various professionals. Within 2 weeks of hiring a PI, I realized I also needed a family law attorney to handle my divorce. Tracy was having an affair with a 21-year-old college student named Ambrose Langenfelter, who she met in several of her classes. They had been intimate multiple times in his off-campus apartment, but what hurt the most was discovering they had also been together in our own bed. Damn it. Damn it all. Damn it to hell. To describe my devastation as simply devastated would be an understatement. I was stunned. She remained my closest confidant, and I was convinced that this would last for a long time. But now I couldn't imagine that we would last another year. Although there are awards for outstanding acting in movies, I think I deserve it for my performance in real life over the next week. I hid my simmering anger and even got close to Tracy twice, and all the while she ignored my confusion. When we were cleaning up after dinner, we were interrupted by the doorbell. When I hesitated to answer, Tracy took it up on herself with an exasperated sigh. I overheard a conversation between her and the receptionist, especially her sharp sigh when she realized that her infidelity had been discovered. I had ample time to pour a glass of wine for both of us and place them on the kitchen table, before Tracy stumbled into the room, clutching the ever-present manila envelope. Without ever meeting my gaze, she took her seat at the table. "How long have you been aware?" she murmured, taking a sip of her wine. Had she looked up, she would have met my intense glare. "How could you? He's scarcely older than our daughter," I whispered in response. For 20, maybe 30 seconds, we sat in silence. She glanced up briefly, then quickly averted her eyes, catching my intense stare. "What on earth, Tracy?" I snapped. "It's about time you stopped pretending." Finally, meeting my gaze, she seemed to gauge how much I knew. "We've been flirting for weeks. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't help myself. I'm sorry," she murmured. "Flirting? Is that what you call it? You've been having an affair with that guy for at least 2 months. He's 21, I yelled. Tracy recoiled in her chair, realizing the extent of my knowledge. She began to tremble slightly. "I have videos, photos," I warned. How many others have there been, you promiscuous woman? I've never raised my voice at my wife before, let alone use the kind of expressions I just did. Her eyes widened in fear, her lips moved, but she didn't say a word. I swear he's the only one, and it was a mistake. This is a mistake, Tal, she exclaimed. Everything got out of control, but it was easy. Don't say that, Trace, don't you dare. Obviously you enjoyed spending time with him because you kept coming back for more. I know he's 21, he'll last. But he doesn't seem any bigger than me. Damn. Maybe you should have held your hand for a well-heeled guy. She blushed deeply and lowered her eyes again. After taking a sip of wine, she looked directly at me, swallowing loudly. Do we have to get divorced? Tracy asked timidly. Me. I don't want to get divorced. Yes, it was incredibly stupid, but there was no love. It was... She stopped abruptly before uttering the decisive words. Tears welled up in her eyes, and I felt torn between anger and sadness. You still haven't apologized for this affair, you know. You apologize for hurting me, but you don't regret what you did, do you? And you still haven't told me why, Tracy. What have I done to deserve this? She blushed deeply, hesitated, choosing her words, then fell silent. She repeated the process twice more before finally being able to formulate her thoughts. It was exciting for me when a young man started flirting with me. He flirted with me by saying that I'm attractive. It made me, an older woman, feel better. Do you understand what I'm talking about? No, Tracy, I don't understand, I replied quietly. I've been telling you that you're beautiful for over 20 years. I've always said that I find you attractive. But obviously my opinion doesn't matter. The only thing that seems to matter to you is what some damn guy thinks of you. The next 2 weeks of work were a real blessing for me. After that, I spent most of my time at my favorite bar, usually returning home just in time for bedtime. Despite Tracy's objections, I chose to sleep in the guest room. I had no desire to share a bed with this woman. Tracy resisted the divorce, and her attorney persuaded the judge to mandate counseling for us. Needless to say, I wasn't pleased. During our initial session with the counselor, I made it clear that infidelity was my non-negotiable boundary. Tracy acknowledged this, or so I thought, until she strayed from our agreement. Yeah, I messed up. I understand we always said cheating was unforgivable, she pleaded. I didn't intend for this to happen. Please, I love you. I don't want us to split. You've shattered my trust, Tracy. You've torn my heart out. I don't see how I could ever rebuild that trust. I felt let down when our daughter, Lydia, sided with her mother. I get that you're hurting, Dad. I am too. But you and Mom have been together forever, and deep down, you know you still love her. What would life be like without her? You'd be miserable. Lydia was always honest, and I valued her perspective. Well, mostly. You have no idea how deeply she's hurt me, Lids. Remember how devastated you were when Robbie Ray broke up with you for Kathy Gibson? Well, multiply that by 100 at least. Would it make sense to you if I yelled, cried, and threw things like you did? Would it be clearer if I described it in more detail? Lydia blushed, indicating she understood my point to some extent. But she's Mom. She's not Robbie. You two have been married for over 20 years. You're supposed to be together forever. It was just one mistake, Dad. One mistake in over 20 years. It was a significant mistake, Lids, and it wasn't just one. It was a series of mistakes over several months, I explained. I anticipated Tracy's parents would advocate for reconciliation, and they didn't disappoint. However, my own parents surprised me. While I expected them to be angry with Tracy, I didn't anticipate them trying to dissuade me from divorce. My father's reaction was particularly unexpected, given his previous declaration that he would kill my mother if she ever cheated. I'm not excusing what she did, Tal, but you need to consider if your life would be better with her in it or without, he said one evening over a few beers at my parents' house. Over time, it felt like I was fighting against a current of forgive her sentiments. I was pretty angry that nobody else seemed to understand my perspective. After all, she was unfaithful. She was unfaithful. Nevertheless, I reluctantly acknowledged that they were correct. Despite feeling devastated by her actions, I still harbored feelings for Tracy. 3 weeks later, I did something unexpected. I gave in, called off the divorce, and reconciled with Tracy. I didn't pretend that everything was suddenly fine, and I made it clear that I didn't trust her at all. Yet, she cried like a child who scraped their knee, clinging to me tightly until I had to gently pry her away, like a shirt that was 2 sizes too small. I returned to our bedroom, but it took more than a week before we became close again, despite her best efforts. It was a purely physical attraction. There was no love between us, and she seemed to realize it. I was hoping for more, Tal. It's been a long time for both of us, she said. Let's take it one step at a time, baby, I replied. It will take time for everything to heal. At least she looked guilty. I ensured that we proceeded cautiously, but approximately 6 months later I believed we had reached a relatively stable point, although I remained realistic, understanding that we could never fully return to our previous state. Nonetheless, I remained cautious as I sensed that, for some reason, Tracy didn't perceive me as sufficient. You're supposed to find me attractive. You're my husband, she remarked during one of our discussions. Ambrose never had to express such sentiments, and the idea that a young person felt that way about me is flattering and somewhat exhilarating. I understand the flattery and excitement aspect. Truly, I do. But you violated our vows, Tracy. You broke our vows. We made those promises in front of our families and friends. You know how seriously I regard those vows. How would you react if I engaged in intimacy with a 21-year-old just because she found me handsome? She appeared devastated, tears welling up in her eyes. You wouldn't do that, would you? As revenge? She whimpered. Tracy ensured that we engaged in many activities together, almost as if she wanted to demonstrate her support for me. Although she continued attending classes and occasionally referenced them, she ceased mentioning Ambrose. While I presumed they were no longer spending time together, I occasionally checked the GPS unit installed in her car by my private investigator during the initial investigation. I never disclosed the existence of the unit to her, and saw no need to remove it. It came as a surprise when, almost 14 months later, a blip appeared on the radar. Among Tracy's destinations during the week was an apartment rented by a classmate named Judy Strangland. While this wouldn't have been entirely unexpected, the frequency of her visits, once a week for the following 4 weeks, raised suspicions. Curiously, she never mentioned spending time with this classmate, even when given the opportunity. To be honest, I was hurt that he had underestimated me so much by returning to the same place, as if it would never have occurred to me to look there in the first place. But then I realized it wasn't about me. It was all about Tracy. Either she had an insatiable appetite for cheating, or, despite her initial denials when I caught her the first time, it was more than just intimacy. It only took my private investigator a month to provide me with enough evidence of Tracy's deception. In the middle of the day, she and Ambrose were visiting a friend. I was sitting quietly in a baggy armchair at the far end of the living room. Tracy practically burst into the room, giggling, and Ambrose followed, holding Tracy tightly by the waist. They were so involved with each other that they didn't even notice me. Laughing, they disappeared into the bedroom, leaving the door open as they thought they were alone. I stayed seated, giving them both a chance to start. About 2 minutes later, I heard sounds. When I got to the doorway, I saw that they had started an entertainment. Reacting quickly, I struck at him so that he would not see my face. He was writhing in pain. At first, my wife flinched, but then she noticed my presence and met my malicious grin. This caused her to stifle a scream as she tried to hide under Ambrose, who had curled up by this point. "Don't bother coming home. You're a disgrace. You've exhausted your second chance with me. And you filthy creature, stay away from me. Just ask my future ex-wife. I don't do empty threats. By the way, she's all yours. Enjoy your new relatives." Ambrose was still whimpering in agony, and I left the apartment without saying another word. I had resolved to depart before her arrival, but en route, a different idea struck me. After all, it was my residence as well, and I wasn't inclined to simply surrender it. Yet I did desire to offer her something. I dispatched a message containing a striking photo of Tracy and Ambrose to my daughter, my parents, her parents, my lawyer, and her attorney. I refrained from including any text with the message. It seemed unnecessary. "Oh, Daddy, did you really have to send this email to your grandparents too?" My daughter protested over the phone. "Wasn't that a bit too much?" "I don't believe it was excessive, especially considering how all of you urged me to reconcile with this woman. If anything, it was your encouragement that led me to attempt reconciliation. I only hope you weren't aware that she intended to continue cheating on me." There was a brief pause before she vehemently denied the accusation. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I truly didn't know. I had no idea," she sobbed. I was aware that Tracy's paramour had no knowledge of my appearance. Conversely, I possessed detailed information about him, including his appearance and whereabouts. I found myself sitting behind Ambrose and two of his friends just a week after the two scammers were caught. I overheard Ambrose bragging to his buddies that he had slept with a woman in her own bed. His friends found it funny until I walked over to their table and sat down next to Ambrose. "What the—" Ambrose began, but I quickly hit him. The three men sat in stunned silence, giving me a chance to speak out. "I am the husband of the woman you called a bad word. The last time I saw you, you were writhing in pain like a child," I said angrily. Ambrose, who was still holding onto the spot where I had struck, at first recoiled, but then tried to act tough. "You owe me, dude," he grumbled. "Great," I replied. "Let's figure it out like men. Your friends are staying here." He nodded to his friends and followed me. He had the advantage in height and weight, but I was bursting with anger. Rage prevailed. Easy. "I've arranged for him to go to the hospital for a few weeks or even months." "You knew she was married, you idiot." "Perhaps you should reconsider your choice of partners," I shouted. "I'll get you arrested for assault," he suddenly exclaimed. "I have a lot of witnesses in my bar who saw you voluntarily go outside with me." "Don't be shy, try it," I replied, looking at the cut on my hand from hitting his tooth. "Moreover, if I accidentally meet a policeman in the next few days, then both your mother, a realtor, and your father, a financial director, will receive a rather interesting video featuring their son and someone else's, a stupid wife." "Oh shit, you wouldn't dare," he muttered. I paused just beyond the bar entrance, scanning the sparse crowd at the Unicorn on a typical Thursday evening. It was precisely why I frequented it on Thursdays. I preferred the quiet. Ever since my divorce from Tracy, I'd avoided crowds for years. Taking my usual spot at the far end of the bar, my favorite bartender, who doubled as my unofficial therapist, placed a double shot of Eagle Rare bourbon on the rocks before me within moments. She locked eyes with me for a brief 5 seconds. "Rough week, Tal? Need to unload?" she inquired. I flashed a crooked grin at the young redhead, giving her a quick once-over, knowing she caught my appraisal. The busty redhead had her hair tied back in a loose ponytail, wearing a snug t-shirt tucked into form-fitting Levi jeans. Over the past year, I'd become a regular at Molly Riley's place, confiding in her more than anyone since Tracy and I split. There are days, Molly, when I wonder if I made the right decision. I mean, I know it was the only choice, but that doesn't stop me from missing her, or at least the version of her from the first 20 years. "Are you sure you wouldn't prefer finding a friend with benefits? I could help you with that." Those are much harder to come by," Molly suggested. "Don't I know it, Malls? Thought I had one, but I was mistaken," I replied. Molly, who was 24, was half my age. Despite being too young for me and already committed to a steady boyfriend, we had a great friendship. Many Thursday nights were spent with her listening to my troubles. It seemed easier to confide in an acquaintance rather than my own family or close friends. "Is your mom single by any chance?" I joked, only half serious. "Well, you'd probably get along with my mom, but my dad's quite attached to her," she replied, giggling. Another customer had taken a seat at the bar a few seats away. Molly went to attend to their needs, leaving me to observe her interactions with the newcomer. The new customer was definitely pleasant to behold. She was a petite woman with blonde hair falling to her shoulders. Despite her attire suggesting someone in their 50s, I figured she was actually around 10 years younger than me. Clad in mom jeans and a loose flannel shirt, she exuded an aura of casual comfort. Yet beneath those clothes I sensed a toned physique. It struck me as I found myself subtly admiring her that I was being rather pathetic. "Who's your friend? I don't recall seeing her in here before," I inquired of Molly as she returned with another double bourbon. Molly glanced between the blonde woman and me, her face lighting up with a smile. I could tell she was piecing something together, so I decided to give her a moment to connect the dots. "Yeah, that's a possibility," she murmured to herself before refocusing on me. "That's Raquel Brignand. She's been dropping by here on and off for the past few weeks. Divorced for a few years from an abusive husband. She used to be quite the brainy nerd back in high school. Now she's a math professor at the local college. Married for 15 years. Finally had enough of the brute mistreating her," Molly explained. "I reckon now she's wary of any guy. She confided in me that she hasn't gone on a date since her divorce. You never know. Maybe the guy she's been searching for is just a few seats away." I could see Molly's mind working overtime. I began to shake my head. "This isn't Sleepless in Seattle or some other romantic movie, Malls. This is reality. Reality hasn't been kind to me, at least not in recent years," I remarked. "Yeah, but you're a catch, Tal. You might just be the solution to the question she's too scared to ask," Molly insisted. We debated it for a bit. Eventually, I relented, allowing Molly to facilitate the introduction. After serving a round of drinks to a group at a nearby table, Molly returned to speak with the woman. They glanced over at me a few times. It felt like I was back in high school. Finally, Molly motioned for me to join them. I strolled over, feeling like I was back in high school, being arranged for a date. As I approached, I observed her dark blue eyes assessing me from head to toe. Internally, I chuckled at the situation, and I must have worn a self-conscious smile externally, given her unabashed scrutiny, which felt very much like something a guy would do. "You'll do," she murmured softly, eliciting a chuckle from me. Molly introduced us to each other and then left, presumably to make some drinks. I wasn't sure, as I was already regretting that I had agreed to this seemingly absurd event. "Feels a bit like a blind date, doesn't it?" the blonde remarked, flashing me a dazzling smile, revealing a full set of beautiful white teeth that caught me off guard. She looked into my eyes intently, as if trying to find something in their depths. As a child, I would probably have looked away, but now I didn't flinch when I met her gaze point blank. We spent about 15 seconds in this silent confrontation, until, for some inexplicable reason, I found myself leaning over and gently kissing her on the lips. It is noteworthy that she did not flinch when I approached, and returned my kiss with the same fervor. "You strike me as more reserved than Molly led me to believe," she murmured softly. I'm not entirely sure why I did that," I stuttered. "Actually, that's the first time I've ever done something like that." She regarded me skeptically, to which I could only offer a shrug and a quizzical raise of my eyebrows. Then, without hesitation, I leaned in once more and we shared another, slightly more passionate kiss. I could definitely get used to this. Realizing I ought to say something, she preempted me. "So, Molly mentioned you were married for quite some time. How's life on the other side treating you? Seems like you've got things pretty well sorted." As she spoke, she made quotation marks in the air with her fingers, punctuating her words with another one of her radiant smiles. "I've been on around 6 dates since my divorce, 3 of them with the same woman, who happens to be a coworker. Looking back, dating used to be enjoyable, but now, not so much." "Well, if we're considering this a date, it's my first one since my divorce 6 years ago. If not, then my streak remains unbroken," she remarked. "I'm not sure what Molly has mentioned to you." "Just the basics," I interjected. "But that's sufficient. Let me affirm I've never raised a hand against a woman." "Good to hear. But just in case, I carry a .22 and know how to use it. Just saying." We spent a couple of hours chatting at the bar, during which I found out that Rocky is 42 years old. She shared that she never considered herself a tough guy, but rather gravitated to the periphery of the popular hangout at her small-town high school. behaving more like a maid of honor. Rocky was diligent and organized. She said that she hardly went on dates in high school, but when she dated, it was usually with a friend of one of the boys who was dating someone from a popular hangout. Rocky first got acquainted with bed life only at the age of 18, in the back seat of her boyfriend's car after the prom. It wasn't a very pleasant experience for her. Rocky went to college to study actuarial science, a field that evaluates financial risks in insurance and finance using mathematical and statistical approaches. While devoting a significant amount of time to her studies, she also engaged in social activities, including partying and dating. It was only 2 years after graduating from university that Rocky began his first serious relationship. She started dating a colleague from the insurance company where they both worked, and after almost a year of courtship, they got married. Despite the 3-year age difference, Rocky treasured this newfound romance. The couple seemed to be head over heels in love with each other until Rocky became pregnant 5 years after their marriage began. Unfortunately, 3 months later, her pregnancy ended, which was a turning point in their relationship. 5 years later, Rocky grew increasingly suspicious that her husband of a decade was having an affair. Her suspicions solidified when she accidentally overheard his conversation one evening upon returning home early from a meeting that was expected to last longer. The ensuing confrontation escalated into a physical confrontation, and she eventually regained consciousness in the hospital 2 days later. Despite Arthur's fervent declarations of love, the divorce proceedings proceeded swiftly. Rocky grappled with feelings of inadequacy and fear for years afterward. 6 years later, she found herself as an associate professor of mathematics, leading a solitary existence akin to that of a nun. None today, none tomorrow, and none next week. She playfully raised her eyebrows at me, followed by hearty laughter. I returned her grin, noting her satisfaction with her jest. "You math enthusiasts aren't known for dominating open mic nights at comedy clubs," I teased, offering her my most innocent smile. Rocky checked the time and mentioned she had to leave. I handed her my phone, suggesting she input her contact information. After a brief hesitation, she took my phone. "Wow, you scored her number. That's significant given her background," remarked Molly as Rocky departed the bar. "But don't wait too long to make a move. Strike while the iron's hot, you know." Taking Molly's advice, I called Rocky the following day to ask her out. She agreed. Despite having gone on a few dates since my divorce, I still felt uneasy about the idea. Ending things with Tracy had left me conflicted, and I took our marriage vows seriously even if she didn't. It would take time for me to come to terms with it all. Nonetheless, I had kissed Rocky twice, and she had reciprocated. It was a new experience for me, even compared to my single days. I couldn't quite explain it, but I was eager to do it again. Over the next few weeks, we dined at various ethnic restaurants, enjoyed a rock concert, indulged in a Mozart performance, and cheered at a hockey game. She seamlessly integrated into my life, fitting snugly by my side whenever I put my arm around her. Our relationship didn't rush to physical intimacy. In fact, it wasn't until our 12th date that we reached that point. After watching a movie together, we retreated to her apartment where she prepared us each a cup of coffee spiked with Baileys. Nestled in the middle of her sofa, I sat while she joined me sideways, her legs draped over my lap. I can only express one thing: it was incredible. "Oh, it surpassed my memories by far," she murmured, grabbing the throw blanket from the back of the couch and draping it over us. We embraced for roughly 10 minutes before she began drifting off to sleep. Before long, she was softly snoring against my chest. I drifted off alongside her, and the drowsiness transformed into a deep sleep for the entire night. The following morning, we relived our night. Afterwards, we tidied up and spent the entire day together, first at her place and then at mine. We enjoyed a nice dinner that evening and decided to head to the Unicorn for a drink. Actually, Rocky insisted on going to the Unicorn because she wanted to have a chat with Molly. Upon our arrival, the bar was quite crowded, so we both understood that Molly wouldn't have much time to spare. Nevertheless, Rocky offered to get us drinks and made her way to the bar while I found us a table. From where I was sitting, I watched as Rocky leaned in to talk to Molly. Then they shared a quick hug before Rocky returned to our table with 2 pineapple daisies. "Are you seriously ordering a pineapple margarita?" I asked. "Oh, of course," she replied. "I love pineapples. Is there any problem with that?" "No, ma'am. I was raised right," I replied. 6 months later, when we were discussing the possibility of living together, I made an unfortunate mistake while we were in bed. I impulsively slapped her hard, causing an unexpected reaction. Rocky froze, her expression turning stern as she pulled away. "It's forbidden from now on," she exclaimed, retreating into the bathroom and locking the door behind her. For the next half hour, I tried to comfort her through the locked door. Although I happened to participate in similar promotions with previous partners, I did not pay attention to Rocky's past experience. In the end, I managed to lure the indignant Rocky out of the bathroom. Over the next 2 hours, I apologized profusely. "I lost control at that moment, baby. It was thoughtless. I would never intentionally hurt you." "You know that," I pleaded. It took her a long time to calm down and accept my apologies. "I understand, Tal, but I refuse to be a victim again. I know you didn't mean to hurt me, but it shouldn't happen again. Never. Understood?" She has stated it firmly. "Completely, baby," I replied quietly. Although Rocky bore no grudge against me, there was a slight tension between us for a couple of weeks. Knowing the backstory, I refrained from pressing her for details, and gradually we reconciled. We were browsing separately in a Barnes & Noble when I noticed him approaching her. He was tall, well-built, in his mid-30s, fairly handsome, and exuded confidence as he walked up to Rocky, lightly touching her forearm to initiate conversation. It was evident that this encounter was not coincidental, and from several aisles away I observed with apprehension. Yes, Rocky and I were involved, but we hadn't formalized our commitment aside from our shared living situation. Was this the beginning of the end for us? Their conversation lasted only a few minutes. At one point, I witnessed Rocky's face flush crimson. He then handed her his phone, presumably to exchange numbers. I watched in dread as she flashed him her most radiant smile, hesitated briefly, and then returned the phone. Releasing a breath I didn't realize I had been holding, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. It dawned on me that I couldn't bear to lose her. After her potential suitor walked away, I slowly returned to Rocky. "You don't seem well," she remarked in a motherly manner, pressing the back of her hand to my forehead to check for a fever. "Oh, really, Mom?" I retorted sarcastically. "I'm perfectly fine." She playfully punched my shoulder, adding a bit of warmth to it. Mom, don't make me give you a spanking, old man." The next day, I went out and purchased the engagement ring. Lydia was pleased for us. She and Rocky had developed a strong bond. It took some time for Lydia and me to repair our relationship after Tracy's second betrayal. She had urged me to reconcile with her mother after the first affair, and I suppose I vented some of my frustration on my daughter after the second betrayal. I also knew she felt guilty for her mother's promiscuity. By mutual agreement, Lydia and I avoided discussing her mother much. Last I heard, Tracy's partner had stayed in the city to pursue his MBA, and they were still intimate during and after their divorce. However, after earning his second degree, he took a job several states away, and Tracy evidently wasn't part of his future plans. According to Lydia, he had informed my ex-wife that she was great, but he had no intention of marrying a woman old enough to be his mother. He wanted someone his own age who could give him 3 children and whom he could flaunt in public. "Not some divorced woman," Lids had remarked. Mom cried for weeks. 2 weeks after I got engaged, Lydia became engaged to her boyfriend of 2 years. When she video called us to share the news, she and Rocky let out those high-pitched squeals that seem to only register comfortably with dogs. They bounced around like hyperactive 5-year-olds on a sugar rush. Meanwhile, her fiance and I opted to stay in the background and smile. Much safer that way. Rocky and I had planned a small, intimate wedding in about 2 months, whereas Lydia desired the whole shebang and scheduled her wedding for a year later. She invited Rocky to assist, but cautioned that Tracy, the mother of the bride, would be the primary helper. My understanding fiancé graciously accepted and offered to pitch in as needed. Despite Tracy attending the rehearsal and dinner alone, she arrived at the wedding accompanied by a date who seemed to be around the same age as our daughter. My daughter wasn't exactly thrilled with this development, and I witnessed them exchange heated words before the ceremony. At least her date had the decency to sit at the back of the church during the ceremony, unlike Rocky, who sat with us in the parents' row. Chuck, a colleague of Tracy's, joined us at the bride's family table during the reception. Initially, he wore a smirk that suggested he harbored a secret he could barely contain. "It's all right, Chuck, we understand," Rocky said, offering a saccharine smile. "You're involved with Tal's ex-wife. How thrilling for you. But if you continue smirking at Tal like that, I might just let him loose, and you'll find yourself getting a well-deserved thrashing right here, like the brat you are." "No problem, ma'am, I meant no harm," Chuck replied in his most servile tone. "Oh, Tracy, you're really involved with this young man? My, oh my," Tracy's flushed mother exclaimed. Tracy remained silent, her gaze fixed on the tablecloth in front of her. I must admit, I found some satisfaction in her discomfort. The remainder of the evening unfolded much more smoothly. Alongside dancing with my daughter for the father-daughter dance, I enjoyed several dances with my wife. I also made a point to dance with my mother and former mother-in-law, although I didn't approach my ex-wife for a dance and barely interacted with her throughout the evening. As the reception drew to a close, Tracy finally gathered the courage to ask me for a dance. "We're the parents of the bride, Tal. We brought that child into the world. We can at least share a dance," she reasoned. "I've never laid a hand on a woman, Tracy. But you came close tonight. No dance. Not now. Not ever." Rocky works as an interior decorator, occasionally needing to put in late hours and weekends as part of her job. Initially, I didn't mind the occasional extra work, but over time it became a regular occurrence without much discussion. She would offer typical excuses whenever I complained about it. One day, around noon, I happened to be in the area and wanted to take my wife to lunch. However, when I asked the receptionist at Rocky's office about her whereabouts, she informed me that Rocky was out on a job for the rest of the afternoon. I didn't leave any contact information, planning to check back later. While it wasn't unusual for Rocky to be out, it struck me as odd that she hadn't mentioned her absence beforehand. We used to share such details over dinner, but lately our communication had become scarce and she seemed more distant. Rocky was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I arrived at 5:45 as usual. She approached me gracefully, giving me a quick kiss and hug. I noticed she had just showered and changed out of her work clothes. My initial reaction was, "Why is this happening to me again?" During dinner, we exchanged casual conversation, and I mentioned stopping by her office to take her to lunch. She quickly diverted her gaze, composing herself before looking back at me. I might not have noticed her reaction if I hadn't anticipated it. "Oh, I just grabbed a meal from the local KFC. I didn't know you were coming over. I would have insisted on going somewhere fancier," she replied nonchalantly. Well played, I thought to myself, pondering how long she had been deceiving me. 2 days later, she phoned me in the afternoon, explaining she had to work late that evening. Normally, I would have headed home and started dinner. Instead, I drove to her workplace and waited in the parking lot a few minutes before closing time. At 5:02, she emerged from the office, got into her car, and drove away. It seemed her claim of working late wasn't accurate. I attempted to tail her discreetly, but I wasn't skilled at it. I got caught in rush hour traffic and lost her. The following day, I contacted the same private investigator I had used before to track Tracy. 2 agonizing weeks later, he provided me with a comprehensive report. During another quiet dinner, I decided it was time to confront her. "Why, Rocky?" I asked calmly. She choked on a mouthful of mashed potatoes. "Because she needed assistance, Tal, and I knew you wouldn't agree if I asked," Rocky admitted. "I understand that part, Rock, but why did you think it was acceptable to lie to me? You know the history between her and me." She visibly cringed, seemingly not having considered that. Oh my God, Tal, you had me followed. You didn't trust me." "No, you can't shift the blame onto me, Rocky. You betrayed my trust. You betrayed my trust. I never imagined you would do that to me." Setting down my fork, I stood up and left. I heard Rocky sobbing as I walked out the door. I sat in one of my beloved local bars, a glass of Coke in front of me, when my father stormed in, his anger mirroring the time I totaled the family Ford at 16. "Are you insane?" he spat, seething. "That woman saved you. She's even helping your ex-wife despite what she did. I understand, Dad, and I know she's remarkable, but her methods were all wrong. If I can't trust her, I don't want her around. I won't go through that again. You need to have a conversation with her instead of drowning your sorrows here," he insisted, still simmering. I pushed my glass toward him. He eyed it, then took a sip. "Ugh, Coke. You come to a bar to drink Coke? I always worried about you spending so much time with your mother growing up." "I need to clear my head, Dad, not get wasted," I replied. "I care for her deeply, but she betrayed my trust in a major way, and the last time I gave a woman a second chance, it didn't end well." "You're justified in your anger, but this isn't about infidelity. That's crucial to remember. Think long and hard before you make any rash decisions," he advised before leaving. Around midnight, I entered the house and found Rocky sitting up, awaiting my return. Tears had left visible streaks on her face. "I messed up big time, Tal. I'm incredibly ashamed to think I could have hurt you like that. I just didn't connect the dots. I was solely focused on helping her out of worry. My mom and yours have also been involved," she confessed in a rush of words as I approached her. At that moment, I couldn't quite grasp my emotions. I settled across from her in the living room and allowed her to speak. "It turns out her boyfriend has been abusing her for months, but she felt too ashamed to confide in anyone. I can relate to that feeling. Sometimes you're too ashamed to speak up, partly because you fear you're somehow to blame. She eventually sought help from her mother, who then reached out to yours. Your mom, aware of my past, approached me. I made her promise not to tell you because I know how you feel about Tracy. But she needed assistance, Tal. My assistance. I should have approached it differently. I acted foolishly and thoughtlessly despite my good intentions. You betrayed my trust, Rocky. I love you, but this can't happen again. I can't handle it," I cautioned. "I know I made a serious mistake, my love. It won't happen again. I promise," she replied softly. "Now that I'm really upset, what if I go talk to Tracy's friend and explain how things will be from now on?" I suggested. "Would you do that for her?" Rocky asked, surprised. "A true man doesn't resort to violence against a woman, even if she deserves it, which in her case." Supported by Rocky, my mother, and her mother, Tracy pressed charges against her boyfriend, a 30-year-old former college football player. He ended up serving jail time. Tracy spent several months working with a therapist. Despite my initial reservations about Rocky becoming friends with Tracy, my discomfort escalated over the years as Lydia and her husband expanded their family with a son and then a daughter. The bond between the two women grew stronger as they shared in the joys of being grandmothers, cherished by both grandchildren. Rocky had no qualms about inviting Tracy over whenever the kids visited. One day, after everyone had left following a day spent at our house, I confronted Rocky. "You realize she's my ex-wife, right?" "Yeah, but she's not the same person she was when she betrayed you. It wouldn't be fair to deny her the chance to enjoy time with the grandkids," she replied. "You know you're a much better person than I am, don't you?" I asked. "Yeah, I'm aware," she replied casually. Rocky seemed determined not to leave things as they were. A few years later, we planned a modest 4th of July gathering. Nothing extravagant, just Lydia and her family, a handful of friends, around 20 people in total. And naturally, Tracy was among the guests, the only single woman there. As for the sole bachelor present, it was a colleague of mine, Reg Wickersham. Technically, he was subordinate to me, and we'd been colleagues for a decade. Reg was roughly my age, and his wife had passed away about 5 years prior. I hadn't extended an invitation to Reg. That was Rocky's doing. I admit I was skeptical when I learned of it. "You must have thought I couldn't put two and two together. Why do women always feel the need to rescue the poor men of the species?" I remarked. "You've been mentioning how lonely Reg has been for the past few years. I believe he and Tracy would hit it off. I've been telling you she's changed. I promise not to meddle, Tal. Just let things unfold. And perhaps try to be a bit more welcoming to her. She's my friend. You don't have to befriend her, but at least dial down the rudeness. After all, she's your daughter's mother and your grandkid's grandmother, Rocky reasoned. I lowered my gaze. She had a point. The event was enjoyable. I observed from a distance, as Reg and Tracy appeared to have a good connection. As the day neared its end, Reg approached me and requested a private conversation. I fetched a bottle of Woodford Reserve bourbon, 2 glasses, and guided him indoors to our den. I poured us each a generous measure. "The floor is yours, Reg," I offered. "What's on your mind?" Reg immigrated from Scotland to this country approximately 2 decades ago. Although his accent has softened over time, when he's tense, he channels full Sean Connery. And he was clearly feeling the strain now. "I know this might be strange, Tal, but can I inquire about what happened between you and Tracy? You've never really spoken about it, and while I don't want to intrude, I suppose I'm trying to determine if I should even pursue her. You know, ask her out." I summarized the key points of our marriage and divorce for him, suggesting he speak to my wife for a fuller perspective on who I am now. "Yeah, perhaps I should chat with Rocky. It's odd that your wife and ex-wife are so close," he remarked. "Would it bother you if I dated her?" "Talk to Rocky. If you like what you hear, I'm totally fine with you seeing Tracy," I replied. 2 nights later, Rocky informed me she was meeting Reg for a drink to discuss Tracy. 18 months later, Rocky was the matron of honor, and I was the best man at Tracy and Reg's wedding. "Well, I had to do something to keep that woman away from my husband," Rocky joked as we discussed how it all unfolded. Lydia and her family were thrilled with the marriage, as were Reg's 2 children and their families. Tracy happily gained 4 more grandchildren. Our family gatherings became quite the affair, happening at least once a month. Rocky and I marked our 25th anniversary much like we did the preceding 24 years, seated at the bar of what was formerly known as the Unicorn. Molly and her husband acquired the establishment from its previous owners around 15 years ago, with some assistance from a silent investor, and for some inexplicable reason rechristened it Molly's. Strange how things turn out. Despite the name change, it has remained a staple for us, not only as a favorite spot, but also as the setting where both our lives found their footing again. All thanks to the intervention of a young bartender who couldn't resist meddling in the affairs of 2 troubled souls. When the opportunity arose for Molly and Jimbo to buy the place, they found themselves just shy of the funds needed to secure a loan. Rocky and I eagerly stepped in to lend a hand. "Yeah, that sounds feasible," I remarked to Molly and Jimbo, both sporting wide smiles.